Good morning and welcome to Merrifield's Gardening Advisor. And no, this is not Debbie Cap as your host today. This is Peg Beer. And I am the host today because I really want you to hang in there with us because we have a fantastic show. The gentleman beside me I've known for many years now, and we love talking gardening.
Absolutely.
And he has written a wonderful book. He's done a lot of articles. He's done a lot of teaching at Longwood Gardens. He's traveled the world. He's gone looking for unusual plants. And now he has written a book which is fantastic. But this is David Culp.
Good morning.
And he lives in the Brandywine area of Pennsylvania, and this is the picture of the front of his new book, which is really hot off the press, David.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. So tell us briefly a little bit about this, because we've got a lot of wonderful announcements.
Well, the book is really, like you said, 2 weeks hot off the press, and this is the first time out publicly at Merrifield Garden Advisors. I'm happy to do this with you. We do have a lot of history. It's on layering the garden. It's a little bit more than succession planting, and I hope to talk about that and get you enthused about going out into your garden before the rains come.
Right. Absolutely, and of course we are concerned about that, but God will guide us through it, I'm sure. And David, we'll get back to you, but we do have a lot of announcements because there are a lot of interesting things going on today at Merrifield Garden Center. First, the seminars are still going on at all three locations. And at 10 o'clock this morning at the Merrifield location, there'll be a program about creating gardens to love for years to come. Now, at the Merrifield location. And then at the Fair Oaks location, guess what? We have David Culp, because we're going to leave the show and go directly to the Fair Oaks location, and he is going to be able to elaborate on his ideas behind the layered garden, how he did it, and guess what? He's going to do a book signing. Now, this is wonderful because I've gotten my way. I've only had time to get halfway through this book, David, okay? Because I've savored every word. I feel like I have a conversation with David, as we so often do when we're together about gardening. This is the wonderful thing. Horticulturists exchange all these thoughts and ideas, and we learn so much from each other. You know, it's wonderful we have the chance to share that with you today. So he's going to do a book signing of his brand new book, and I assure you it's beautiful and will make incredible Christmas gifts. So I want to encourage any of you out there to do come to the Fair Oaks location because he has a lot to share. Okay, I'll say we have a seminar going on at our Gainesville location, and that is going to be Pruning Made Easy. And he's probably going to, part of which he's going to tell you is, don't be too heavy-handed yet, okay? But there's a lot going on. Plus, at the Gainesville location, we're continuing with the Fall Festival. A lot goes on there, a lot to entertain the children. Face painting, hay rides, moon bounces, all manner of stuff. And to make it even more interesting, we're also going to have a dog Halloween costume contest. Registration begins at noon today. The judging is at 1 o'clock, and there are prizes. Wow, David, $100 gift certificate for the grand prize and $25 gift certificates for the cutest, the funniest, the scariest, the most unique, and the best kisser. Okay. Now, there's also a pumpkin carving contest. Bring in your best carved pumpkin. Registration and setup is a little later in the day. It's at 6 o'clock. with judging at 7. And there will be winners, first and second place winners in beginner and in advanced categories, okay? And you know, I have another announcement to make. And I'm going to give you the details a little bit later because I left my notes in my purse and I don't have that handy right now. But there are giveaway tickets, and I'll give you the details on that later, for the Justin Bieber.
That should be popular.
Should be very popular. And so I will tell you that you have to come into the store, you have to be 18 years or older, and you can come into the store several days in a row ahead of, but I will have to get those notes and give you the details of that later. Okay, David. All these exciting things in one day.
Love it.
Fortunately, we're going to have a decent day to do it, you know. Let's bring up the next picture before we let go of this particular segment. This, I think, is the epitome of that layered garden, because you can see there are large trees here, which is part of the canopy.
It's part of the layered garden. It's taking it from tree level all the way down to the ground level, creating many different interests of layers through the garden. Not just layers of space, but also layers of time and relationships of one border to the next border, as well as plant to plant. And including that all-important topic, a sense of place, making a garden that is appropriate to the region in which you live in. You see on the hillside the vertical trees echoed with many other vertical elements throughout the garden, and we'll explore those possibilities and ideas a little bit more throughout the lecture this morning.
This is wonderful. Yes, I do encourage you to come to the lecture because we can be more in-depth. But I have certainly gone through all these wonderful pictures that are included in this book. And no, it's not a picture book, but it is a picture book. There's a lot of information along with it, but a picture is 1,000 words. I do believe that, David.
It certainly is, and I use pictures a lot of times. Other than keeping a journal, I'll look at pictures and see how I can improve this look. And I had a wonderful photographer, Rob Cardillo, who worked with me on this the past 2 years. He certainly made it come alive.
He had to have been in your garden a great deal, because you couldn't have gotten these pictures otherwise.
He was there 32 times for many hours a day, just waiting for the light, the right moment to give us good pictures and ideas of what the layered garden could be.
And I, as a gardener, gardening in a wooded area, know that David and Michael, who worked this garden together, had to be vigilant about keeping it clean for that 2 years. I mean, incredibly clean.
Well, the hardest thing, Peggy, was
Wow.
not to be able to change anything for 2 years, since they were doing a succession shot through it. And I'm much like you. I like to play and change things in the garden. That's part of the fun of it.
A little bit anyway. Absolutely. We will be back in just a moment, and David's going to share more of his thinking behind this layering, this four-season interest. So we'll be back after our break. Welcome back to Merrifield's Gardening Advisory. I'm just so pleased that we have David Culp with us today, because we are literally in his garden, and he is going to tell you about all these different layers. And of course I'm chuckling because you can see he's a nice tall man. And this is a hillside. It is a wooded hillside, and I teasingly said, I need to stand up on the upper level.
Walk up the hill.
Okay, David, let's talk to people about this. I'm going to step back.
Well, the garden is basically 2 acres. The hillside encompasses 1 acre of the entire garden. It is wooded. I made the choice to leave those mature trees there to enhance the sense of place. So the trees are a very important part of the garden. As Peggy mentioned, I teach a shade perennials class at Longwood. 2/3 of this 2-acre property is in the shade. One of my passions, besides being shade plants in general, are hellebores. The bed at the lower part of the screen is made for hellebores. But it's more than just this hellebore bed that we're talking about. It's about relationships up into the other borders. That's part of the layered garden, kind of pulling an idea and a picture all the way through, repeating colors, repeating forms like the verticals throughout the entire garden, giving unity to the overall design. I only have about 1/3 of an acre in full sun, so I use brighter colors. And I also have the garden peaking at different times. When the hillside is in full bloom and the hellebore bed is in full bloom, the rest of the garden is quieter. It's like being on a play or a stage. As one player comes on, the other players go off, hopefully very gracefully. So there's different areas of interest throughout the year in the layered garden.
I absolutely do love it, and it's so easy to see it in this picture because your taller trees, whether you've got one or perhaps the intermediate trees, is your canopy.
Well,
And it's wonderful.
I have these older, mature over canopies, and I've replanted by hand the entire acre hillside to make it look naturalistic. And one of the important considerations is putting that smaller tree shrub layer back into your garden, as well as the perennials. I do love being here today, Peggy, thank you. And I feel like I'm in the garden. And even more importantly, I like being in the garden with a gardening friend. It makes it even better.
Yes, and then we've got that understory layer, which I think in the next picture we'll give you a little closer view of it. This is pretty much your, after you've left your canopy and come down to the next layer, you've got those beautiful flowering trees. So do tell us about this one.
As you move from the woodland, I call it a transition area. Your garden kind of moves from more informal to a gradually more formal area. And as you move into the quote, structured part of the garden, it's the transition. It's about more than succession planning. It's about how plants live, grow, and die to create a layered garden. You see back here that many of the galanthus have gone out of bloom, but yet they provide a vertical. It's using plants together to create many seasons of interest. Before that, you had the hellebores blooming. Now the ostrich ferns are coming up with a rhododendron blooming, which gives a different expression, a different mood to each time of the year. Here we have a stattlestone, which gives kind of a nod to utilitarian ornaments in the garden. The house was built in 1790s, and giving a nod to my ancestry, I'd done a plain garden. By that I mean using ornaments that are all basically utilitarian throughout the garden, again to give unity and sense of place. So it's the plants, it's the garden accents that give you other layers in the garden.
And let's move on to another picture here because it's another different look, and we all are looking for privacy in our garden. We love people, absolutely do. But when you come home, you need a little bit of seclusion, and we seek it in different ways. Either through plants, which you've done in your garden, but also with a portion of it with the fence that takes care of that. And then you've got that understory that helps, right?
Well, I travel a lot. I travel up and down the 95 corridor from Connecticut to Northern Virginia. And when I get off 95, I want to forget about the highway. I've tried to create something that kind of takes me away. The strength of any garden, I feel, is its ability to take you away from the thoughts of the world. So screening is very important. I've created screens with shrubs. I've created screens with the fence to help me forget about what's going on. I've tried to make a little oasis. This particular border is made to bloom in the fall. That is its main season of interest. The hillside early on, the south border peaks at a different time. I like to layer the garden so it has different peak moments depending on the time of the year. If it was all blooming at once, what would I have to look forward to? So I've designed it with a series of peak moments or layers in mind.
I think that's fantastic. Well, we talked about the canopy of your trees, and you could see that so graphically in the first picture. And then we've talked about the understory trees, which is so important for a lot of the flowering things. And we touched on the importance of evergreens.
Absolutely.
Yes.
The tree canopy, I just think that's one thing that people don't take a design note to. You should design at all layers, I feel. The tree layer is very important. You can do designs at the tree layer just as importantly as you can the ground layer and the perennial layer.
And
it all has to be addressed.
And that's behind us. So just briefly, before we go on our break, tell a little bit about that perennial and ground layer.
Well, I tend to favor perennials because they give that essence of change throughout the garden. Okay, I really like the fact that they roll through the seasons. This image demonstrates the importance of repeating a certain shape. I had vertical elements with the trees. I have vertical elements with the picket fence around the house. So this is the north border. Possibly in the middle of June going into July. But I've repeated the vertical from the shade to the verticals of the Thermopsis, the verticals of the Digitalis, the foxgloves, the salvia in the foreground. Again, repeating that vertical shape throughout the garden. When you use as many plants as I do, repetition of color, repetition of shape gives unity to the site. This north border is the one that I work to death. It's the one that you see as you come down the driveway. This is a full sun border.
And that's fantastic that he has both. And there are bulbs, long season of bulbs, because he's used the early ones right through the very last ones that bloom. And this is very beautifully portrayed in the book. And of course we don't have time to go out into all of it right now, but we will be sharing more of these wonderful pictures and more of his ideas, and we will be back in just a minute. Welcome back to Merrifield's Gardening Advisor, and to our wonderful guest, David Culp. We're so pleased to have David sharing his thoughts and sharing why he wrote this wonderful book, The Layered Garden. But David, before we go on with this, I want to clarify something, because Debbie Cat will not be happy with me, okay, as hostess, for not doing this well. Okay, I know everybody's excited because Justin Bieber is going to be at the Verizon Center on November 5th. And Merrifield Garden Center has tickets to give away on a drawing. You may come into either of the 3 locations through November 1st and register to win. You must be 18 to enter that. And you can enter each time you come in, and no purchase is necessary. The winners will be drawn on Friday before, because you want to be all set up for going on November 5th. So I know that there will be a lot of you that are excited about this, and it'll be a fun thing. So be sure you tuck that into the back of your mind that you can come in at any time now through November 1st and register for that concert. All right, David, it's all ours now. We want to continue your thought process with this layered garden, and I know that you were talking about that most of this is a shady garden, and I understand that because mine is too. So you cherish that certain amount of sun, and what did you do with it?
Well, I put in a 4-square garden, which was kind of appropriate to the age of the house, being a colonial home. The 4-square garden was appropriate to the time. Circuitous borders are more Victorian. But again, in the sunny part, the heart of the garden is a vegetable garden. I put that in right away because it kind of feeds the eye as well as the soul and the table. So that is a signature feature of the garden, is the vegetable garden in the center. Then it comes out in series of rectangles throughout the double borders. So you have 12 different rectangles throughout the garden. You also see clearly in this image the repetition of the vertical elements. You see the digitalis, you see the vertical of the picket fence, you see the vertical of the trellises for the tomatoes and beans, you see the verticals of the trellises in the back, the poles for the roses to go up. So again, giving unity around. The idea of double borders is to walk through and be more at eye level with the garden. The picture of the border in front of the screen with the digitalis is actually mounded slightly up 12 inches, so the plants can be more at eye level. Now, doing a garden like this is very complex and hard to describe. It's like trying to describe a complex food, like maybe curry. I could give you a list of all the ingredients, but it just wouldn't get it. Is it hot? Is it spicy? But a garden like this is much like a curry. It can be savored on many different levels. Okay, you can take it on the plant level. You can take it on a design level. You can take it on a particular level. And hopefully, as we go through the garden, maybe a time, Peggy, when you and I would walk around, we could take this on many different levels. The big picture down to a 3-plant combination. Every place is fair game to make a different layer in the garden.
And the beauty of that is, of course, with the changing of the seasons and the changing of these perennials, I personally think one of the nice things about the fact that perennials don't bloom for 4 months is that you can enjoy those changes. And those changes are seasonal. So you can have beautiful pinks and purples in one season and hot orange in the other. I think that the next picture, if we'll bring it up, is pretty graphic on these borders too. And I can see, David, that you have mounded this one, and there's several reasons, I'm sure, why you did that.
I mounded this up. This is the hellebore bed that we saw in one of the first images. It goes from being very, very colorful. This is how this bed looks for most of the year. I am a believer of texture first and then doing the overlay with color on top of the texture. The texture is what carries your design through. Now, it's also interesting to note that even though this is how it looks through most of the summer, is that this particular bed is done under black walnuts. It's been an experiment with me to see what can be done under black walnut trees and how to make it interesting with a variety and a big biodiversity of plants. It can be done. I think we don't have 4-season gardens are challenging areas because we don't demand it out of our garden. We just have to think about it, and we can have interest in our garden year-round and in difficult sites.
And this is beautiful. The fern gives it that wonderful vertical interest and keeps it from looking so flat. It's three-dimensional, it really is. And I think it's wonderful how David has also used seasonal accents that are not necessarily hardy. And when we go into the next picture, you can see how he's done this very, very effectively. But I want him to share also with you something that all of us gardeners face, David, as you and I have spoken of. There are some of these plants that can be a little, I want to say thuggish, okay? But sometimes there's a good reason for dealing with that.
The plant underneath is Euphorbia cyperus, and it doesn't run through the garden, it gallops through. But I use it, what you're seeing here is the hell strip by the road. It is completely unwatered, hot and dry. These agaves, cordylines can take the drought, as well as this little euphorbia. Also, this euphorbia, I plant minor bulbs in it, like my tulips. The euphorbia has a sap in it, latex, which the voles and moles don't go through to eat my minor bulbs. So it's a very pragmatic combination, if you will. Hot and dry, no water. You need a plant with an ebullient nature, and of course the agaves in this area don't need water also, and it kind of helps slow down traffic. Now mind you, this particular garden goes straight out to the asphalt on the road, so it's very hot and dry. So they perform under these conditions.
Right, and of course that particular plant would have to come in. David, we are running short of time, but I want to go through the next 3 pictures, please. In the next picture is very graphic too, because it's wonderful, a change of seasons, and I think people need to understand that that seasonal color is so doable, you know.
This is the main border, which actually starts at tulip time, goes into what you would call full blush perennial time with peonies, roses, digitalis, and this is how that border looks in the fall. You know, I like to think that perhaps spring is like drinking a nice white crisp wine, a white wine, and fall is like drinking a Burgundy or maybe even an Armagnac. It's a richer time of the year because that's what Mother Nature is using in the larger wild garden. You look around, you get your cues from what's going on in the native landscape and duplicate those colors in your perennial borders as well.
The fall season is so beautiful. For me, it rivals spring, and it's interesting. And with all of this, David, you don't really have to take the drive. Of course, I know you're on the road a great deal. And in the next picture, I know that David has a real love affair with this, and since we're running out of time, thank goodness he's not going to be able to tell you all about that love affair.
Well, I have an hour-and-a-half lecture maybe this winter I can do on snowdrops. I grow 150 different cultivars of snowdrops, and it's something that I can count blooming in my garden throughout the entire winter. If gardening is a competitive sport and you want something to bloom all 12 months out of the year, this is the plant that gives you the little edge. Nothing more wonderful than a plant that blooms in the wintertime with snow on the ground.
Bowie absolutely does. It's great, and I think you did a great job. Again, bulbs, and right now's the time to plant them. But in the next picture, it's so wonderful.
Here's ostrich fern and an old-fashioned white cultivar of Narcissus. I believe it's White Admiral. But again, the whole book's premise is how much can you wring out of one spot in the garden? How much pleasure can you wring out of one space? And you have these garden moments that go throughout the growing season and perhaps even a lifetime of combinations that happen that you can take with you throughout the layer of time.
And he's given you so many wonderful ideas. And do remember that copying is a great form of flattery. And it's so easy when you've got these big, beautiful pictures to give you a guide. Now, I do want to tell you before we go on break that we will be taking your phone calls today, and so particularly if you have any design or horticultural questions pertaining to this type of garden, of course David can answer any question, but he'd love to talk about this a little bit more. So we'll be off on a break, and we will be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Merrifield's Gardening Advisor, and to our guest, David Culp, who's talking to you about his layered garden. And we will continue with this. Now, I told you in the last segment that he sort of has this love affair with this wonderful bulb that gives beauty even through the snow. But I have to tell you that he has a love affair with another one, but it's much more extensive. He has taken Helleborus and taken it to a wonderful realm because he's hybridizing it, and here it is performing in the snow.
I suppose if the garden had a particular signature plant, it would be hellebores indeed. I've been breeding them for several decades now. I fell in love with their moxie, their verve. Anything that blooms with snow and frost, man, you have to love its spirit. And that's what I like about hellebores. They start blooming for me at the end of February and go through June. It's a very long blooming perennial. The hellebores that are called the Brandywine hybrids, actually I bred them at the Brandywine Cottage. These are my own particular plants and my own particular strain. I'm breeding for color saturation, and a perfect place to plant them is on a hillside or up on a rock wall where you can look up into their faces. When I bought the property, I had kind of an epiphany or an aha moment of sorts, saying this is going to be a perfect place to house my collection of hellebores. And they're wildly popular. As a matter of fact, a few years ago, they were the perennial plant of the year. And important for you, of those who live in deer country, they are deer resistant. Maybe not proof, but deer resistant. They don't browse on them in my garden. And they have evergreen foliage, which gives you something to help you know that all is not lost in the gardening season. That's very important to me. Being a gardener, I get cabin fever in the wintertime. So I've created a garden for all 4 seasons with a particular interest in the winter garden. Hellebores are very important to me, to say the least.
And I know that they are, and for good reason, because again, the deer don't normally eat them. Nobody ever says that they don't positively. I think they have an incredibly long period of interest in bloom, and pairing them with something else that's interesting and that also is still evident in the winter. I love this combination that you've done, David.
Well, thank you, Peggy. That's really high praise coming from you, someone who gives me inspiration as well. You know, there's nothing I like better than observing plants and in the gardens in which they reside. But the closer I look, the more in love that I fall with gardens and plants. But I have to tell you, it's also with people. So what makes it even better for me is observing them with a kindred spirit. I like that very much. Here is a euphorbia in combination with hellebore pink frost. This happened to be done in a container. So giving unity of a certain plant, whether it be in a container or in the open garden, using one plant in a variety of different ways or expression, gives unity to the garden. In this particular combination, I used that smoky pink color of the petal, or more correctly called sepal, of the hellebore, and tried to pull out the chartreuse color of the nectaries, echoing that with the bracts of the euphorbia. And this is a very long-lasting combination. It lasts for, I would say, 4 to 6 weeks in the garden, so it gives you a long season of interest.
But it's interesting even when it's not completely in bloom. David, I love to use the euphorbias with the pansies right now. When you're planting up pansies, go into the perennial garden and pick up some euphorbia. I think it's fun. You know, we all have to have fun in the garden and well, we're doing creative things every day, but I love the next one. It's fun.
Well, you know, every place is fair game. I love containers. I like containers because I can move them around, and I like container work because you can be as creative as you want to be. You're only limited by your imagination. Here is an old piece of wood, hollowed out and planted with echeverias. This is in 2/3 sun, 1/3 shade, so it won't scorch the echeverias on the picnic table. A very kind of rustic, architectural container. I just enjoy having fun and being playful in the garden. You should be having fun with what you are doing. Again, this one doesn't need much water. I have a 360-foot well. I have to be very conscious about how I water. So water-wise, plants are very important to me.
Absolutely, and I think it is. We do have to have fun in the garden. We have to enjoy it. And before we leave this segment, there is another plant that I know that you enjoy very much, and certainly that I do also, and it is in bloom right now.
It's the anemones. They're kind of a signature fall plant. Anemones, asters, chrysanthemums are kind of the backbones of the perennial garden that are in bloom right now. You have the added bonus when you visit your garden center at this time of the year. You can see the color that you want in the anemones, so you can actually pick your color a little bit better right now. I would recommend when you plant them now to give them a little bit of mulch to help them overwinter their first winter. But there's a variety of colors: whites, pinks, singles, doubles, and perfect for the part shade garden.
And that's fantastic. And actually, the next two pictures I would ask you to just bring up as we're going out. We will be taking your phone calls when we come back. The number is 703-387-1046. So give us a call, and David will be delighted to share more of his ideas with you. Welcome back to Merrifield's Gardening Advisor. We've enjoyed the thought process that David Culp has taken through on his wonderful, brand spanking new book, The Layered Garden. And I want to remind you, for some of those you who may have come in late, that David will be going with me to the Fair Oaks location. He will give a lecture on his very own layered garden, and he will be signing these books. And it's a beautiful book, and they make wonderful Christmas presents too. Now, to our questions, because we're very grateful to all of you who watch the show and who give us these call-in questions. I understand we have Christy of Brunswick on the phone right now.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, Christy. And your question?
Well, I'm telling you, I'm an avid gardener, and I absolutely love being outside. One side of my yard backs up to a farm field, and what I've been battling for many, many years, which is literally driving me crazy, is I have something called, I guess it's a bindweed or a wild morning glory vine, and it literally is just taking over. And I've tried many things spraying it, and I have not had any success.
David, any ideas on that?
Well, when it comes to garden maintenance, I suppose eternal vigilance is part of the game. I've pulled out bindweed. You know, do I ever win? I think I do sometimes, but as soon as I'm lured into that moment of complacency, it tends to come back, and I have to fight it all over again. Perhaps maybe smothering it out by putting layers of newspaper over the ground to help smother the roots would help. You know, I kind of feel like this part of the segment is like car talk. It's stump the chump. But I have a secret weapon here, Peggy Beer. She can give added answers to the questions that we have today.
Well, we all have different ways of going about things, and I too can get as frustrated as the next person with this, and I don't think it'll ever totally conquer it. I have had fairly good luck with putting down several layers of newspaper, and I do that in the spring before it comes up, and then mulching on top of it. At least it keeps it a little bit under control, you know, but you can't just walk away from it because it just gets worse. Thank you, Christy.
Actually, I'd like to continue if I may have another minute. I have landscaping fabric all over my garden. Right. And the only places that it's not is where the bushes come up and my perennials.
Right.
And it is literally traveling underneath there like a mass highway system.
Right, right. It's very easy to do that. You know, I don't use a lot of the landscape fabric myself because things eventually it has enough soil buildup or mulch buildup that seeds germinate in it anyway. And each year it's very easy to replace several layers of newspaper. You just have to use enough of it and overlap it, okay? That is a hope anyway, Christy, okay?
Now, is there any kind of killer that you would suggest? Spraying?
Roundup, David?
I usually, and I agree with Peggy in that it's the newspaper helps a lot in that you can actually try to do some pulling or digging out of the roots, unlike the landscape fabric, which makes like a mat underneath and you can't get at it. So at least once a year you can do some pulling and digging as well.
I pull all the time, and it's like one of those things. The vine starts here, and then it's like 10 feet over. It's everywhere. It's like
right.
Jumanji growing in my garden.
Yeah, you can judiciously try the Roundup, I think, in addition to the papers, because that will kill down. But again, it's just something you're going to have to keep after. I wish we had a better answer. Thank you for calling, Christy.
All right.
And I believe we also have Bonnie on the line.
You certainly do.
Bonnie, your question was?
Well, I have two big questions, but we can go on as much as the last lady did.
Well,
and David, thank you for your ideas. The first question is, what do you plant with your fall anemones?
The fall anemones, I have some lobelias.
Oh, good.
The blue lobelias, that's for early on.
Uh-huh.
I have some sedum along the sunnier parts.
Like the Autumn Joy?
The Autumn Joy is a real favorite of mine. It's been around for a long time for a good reason. It's a very strong grower.
Okay.
I also use some colors of foliage. Peggy has in the foreground here some Amsonia hubrectii. But I use perhaps not only the Amsonia because it's a part shade garden, I will use Hacanocloa, either Albostriata, which has a white variegation, or I will use Macroaureola, which is a yellow variegation, in with the Korean mums and the fall anemones. Also towards the back of them, don't forget about the varieties of hostas that we have.
Well, I noted, okay.
They can provide another color layer as well to make those colors of the anemones just bounce. Also Tricertus in the part shade area are good to put with them. Often they're blue, so the blue and the apricot colors just work very nicely together.
Oh, that's great.
And
now
Bonnie,
here's the hard question.
Yeah, Bonnie,
Talk to me about black walnut trees and what you get to grow under them.
Okay, we're going to have to leave that for the moment, Bonnie, because they're telling me I have to go to a break. But we'll be back in a moment, and he will address that thoroughly at this seminar. And if he has the moment here also. Thank you very much. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to Mary Fields Gardening Advisor and to the questions. And unfortunately, we didn't have the time to go into all of Bonnie's questions. But at the moment, we have Linda on the phone. And is Linda there, please?
Yes, I am. Hi, real quick. I moved a crepe myrtle bush, not the tree, and it's like dying already. Is it possible that I can move the other one and do something different?
Well, we'd have to know what you did to start with. What do you think, Dave?
As a rule of thumb, I don't move anything when it's in full bloom. If the crepe myrtle was blooming, it might
was.
Yeah, well, because it's putting all of its energy into making that flower. So if you move it when it's in flower, it kind of shocks the plant a little bit more. There's a product that I like to use called Super Thrive. When I'm transplanting it, it's basically a vitamin B vitamin that helps reduce transplant and shock. But the general rule of thumb, not in bloom, and really, really watch the watering when you move it, because those root hairs have become broken and it cannot draw up water as much at this time of the year. So watching the water requirements when you move it is very, very important.
Do you think it'll come back?
Yeah, crepe myrtles don't, write it off right now. Oftentimes they'll be in shock and will come back at another time of the year. I'd give it a full season. Normally I start moving them a little bit in the spring after they've started breaking new growth. Peggy, you probably know a little bit.
I agree with what you've had to say about that, but now is a great time to. There's a big difference between moving something that's established in your garden and going to the garden center and buying something that was dug at the proper time or is in a container. There's a big difference. You know, you lose that support system otherwise. Fall is, I think, good for transplanting a lot of things, particularly now that most of them are defoliating. Okay, so I do move things in the fall.
Okay, Ms. Peggy, I know you have to go, but with the storm coming up, should I go ahead and cut my tall grass or just let it go through the storm?
Give it a shot, honey. Let it go. You may come through fine. You know, we don't have time for any more questions.
Okay.
I do. Thank you for calling, though, and those of you that we did not get to. Want to remind you that David is going to be at the Fair Oaks location. He will have his wonderful book, and he will do a book signing. And David, I so much enjoyed having you on the show today.
Always a pleasure, ma'am.
We always enjoy this back and forth with the plant world. So we thank you also for watching. And come and join us at one of our locations today. It's a great thing to do when you just try not to think about that storm that's coming. So have a good day and hopefully a safe next few days. Thank you.